Hi, everyone. I hope that you are doing well. Um, I hope that you and your families and your friends are all surviving, weathering as much as possible during our times of uncertainty. I want to thank you again for joining um, this conversation, um, for even listening, because I appreciate it. It's a lot to ask. I recognize, and a lot of us are feeling very fatigued. Um, when this felt like it would be a week or 2 weeks, it felt more survivable. Um, Now we are in week five, for me at least, of the kind of uncertainty, and it's starting to really feel heavier. And so I want to honor the fatigue that you all might be feeling and the fatigue that I'm definitely feeling. I've been having trouble sleeping, um, trying to not worry. I've said this before, trying to not worry, trying to be sober, trying to be realistic, but also just reading about like the folks that I know who are getting sick, people who are passing away, people who are dying. Um, it's making me really, really sad. And, I keep saying it's okay to be sad. I keep saying it's okay to cry. I cry. Um, I'll just happen to start crying while sleeping. I'll wake up and I'm crying, or when I wake up in the morning, I'll start crying. Um, all of these feelings, these emotions are real, they are valid. Sometimes I feel very disconnected temporally, that I don't know what the day is. I don't know what the time is. It all feels like it's a lot. And so I want to honor the fact that you all might be feeling that intensity as well. I know that I am. And it's just been um, it's a lot. So I thank you for joining, and I thank you for trying whatever it is that you're trying. I thank you for just trying to breathe, because that too is important. Um, and so I wanted us to watch two videos. The first one was from Democracy Now!, very short 10-minute interview with Mariam Kaba and Dean Spade. Mariam is a friend of mine, a person who I learn from practically daily. Um, and I really appreciate the conversation that they had on Democracy Now! About mutual aid. I think it's important for us to think about. I keep talking about, like, otherwise possibility, and we talked about the role of the Black scholar. We talked about the question, what kind of person do you want to be? What do you want to be your guiding moral, your guiding ethic through which you move in the world, such that you address harm with care as opposed to addressing harm with militaristic violence, because that doesn't address harm, but actually produces the occasion for more harm to proliferate, right? We've asked those questions of the role of, like, why are we still in this class? Why are we trying to learn anything about African American studies when there is this biological crisis that is happening? Um, what is the purpose of thinking about me as a faculty member, as a professor who is trying to teach something to you? Um, I don't think of my teaching as what activist and educator Paulo Freire would call the banking model. I don't have all the knowledge, and that, I pour into you the things that I know, and then you are smart, right? That I think of teaching, and I think of learning, I think of the acquisition of knowledge as a dialogic process. I think of it as a process of learning with. And so I'm constantly learning with you all, trying to think with you all about not just this crisis, the spectacular event that we are confronted with, but I'm trying to think along with you about this long ongoing crisis and how we can address things, right? I wanted us to read about mutual aid because I've been talking about the concept of otherwise possibility, the concept that other possibilities or alternatives to the normative exist in our current moment. Often we talk about, like, utopias as these futureward things that we can never attain. Um, I want to think about how are people currently in this world, in this moment, practicing alternatives to the normative, both out of the necessity of the recognition that the state or governance will not do the kind of care work that is important, and the so one out of necessity, but two because of love, right? That the reason why we do things can be grounded in an ethic and a moral of care and love. Love ain't a frilly thing. Love ain't some silly kind of thing. I was talking to a friend earlier, and I was talking to myself in the woods before I was talking to my friend about a lot of the writing that I do. This person said that the writing that I do sounds like it's about forgiveness, and specifically around forgiveness of the church. And I know a lot of people have a lot of sort of very visceral response to the concept of forgiveness, and I've written about forgiveness a lot. When I try to think about the concept of forgiveness, I try to think of it as a non coercive practice of care. Actually, what you do, what it can only be something that is practiced from the one who is offering it. It cannot be something that is compelled. It cannot be something that is coerced. It has to be something that is freely given. And so this person said that it sounds like when they were reading my work, that the work sounds like it's about forgiveness. And I began to talk about my relationship with the church, with churches of my upbringing, with places where I've been a musician and a choir director, places where I've joined, churches of my youth. These places are places that I love, right? And I practice a deep critique of the theology and doctrines of those places, not out of a place of malice, not out of a place of anger, but out of a place of genuine love, because these places are the places and spaces that formed me, that gave me an occasion to actually sense the world and its possibility with a kind of density that allowed me to love blackness, right? I don't think of blackness as predicated upon or foundationally about trauma that has happened to black people. I think of blackness as like the shit that happened in the church, where there's all this love, there's all this joy, there's all this pleasure, there's all this sound of like the Hammond organ and the hand clapping and the foot stomping, and there's the sound of the tambourine, and there are people who are cooking food and you're smelling the food and you're waiting for the service to end because it's too long, because you want to eat the fried chicken and you want to eat the macaroni and cheese and you want to eat the cake. Chocolate frosting with yellow cake is the best cake in the world. I love it. Um, those places taught me how to love, right? But those places are also places that are deeply violent because of homophobia, trans antagonism, sexism, misogynoir, classism. Those same places that taught me about the complexity of love and care are the same places that were deeply harmful to people in general and to me as a queer person, right? Or not as a queer person, but as a person who practices queerness. I think it's important to say it like that. I have been really trying. And so, what I said to this person is that the work that I'm trying to do in my own sort of personal writing is to practice a kind of forgiveness, insofar as what I recognize is that there is something that this place has gifted me, and that the exclusion that it is doing to me is violent and harmful and hurtful and heartbreaking only insofar as it has also given me an occasion to live. It has taught me that otherwise possibility is not only possible, but has been practiced, right? And it has also then given me the tools in order to critique the space and the violence and the harm that it practices and it produces against me. It's fundamentally the way in through which I move through the world. That I understand that it is necessary to think about the concept of the otherwise as an invitational practice of welcome, right? That what you do is you make the space available in order for others to join up with that. And that is true not just in terms of religiosity. I think it's also true in terms of the concepts of like Black feminist practices, Black queer theory. That what you're constantly trying to do is invite others to the joyous occasion of the otherwise possibility that is being practiced in the here now, right? So I wanted us to think about and listen to and watch people talk about mutual aid, because mutual aid seems to be doing the practice of otherwise possibility. Some of the things that they said is that mutual aid is the offering of direct needs for things like food, medicine, and rent. It creates in the here and now moment then alternatives to the normative structure from which food, medicine, and things like rent money are actually sort of given to people, right? Because of this urgency of the need with which people are being confronted with, like things like job layoffs, being fired from their places where they work, so they're not having income. So what are the other ways that we can make sure people are fed, right? One of the things that Dean Spade said is that mutual aid is the banding together of people to meet needs for survival through a certain kind of immediacy. And Dean also said that the systems in place aren't coming to meet them, right? If we recognize that the systems that are already in place are not meeting the needs of people in this current iteration of crisis called COVID-19, and if we actually pay attention to the fact that the systems that are in place have not been meeting the needs of people previous to COVID-19, then we come to understand the necessity for the practice of otherwise possibility in any here now moment. Right? It's not just that it's necessary here and now because of the biological fact of COVID-19. It's something that has had to be practiced previous to it. There's an example. When I grew up, when I was a young person growing up at this church in New Jersey, my mother wanted to introduce something called a love basket. It was her idea, where every month the saints would gather in a big box, groceries, non-perishable food items, and other things like money, clothes, whatever people had that they could give. And each month, the church would, without asking people, like, what is your income? What is your need? Whatever, the church would literally just select a person or a family to be the recipient of the love basket, right? And lots of people ended up joining the church because you didn't have to be a member of the church in order to receive the love basket, which was very important. You could just be someone who visited the church often. As long as there was some kind of relationship where they knew you, you could be one of the recipients of the love basket. This is one of the practices of otherwise possibility. When you recognize that the state isn't meeting the needs of the people, what are some other kinds of ways that we can meet needs for people, right? The problem is that these things are ephemeral often, that they are not long lasting, or that they don't transform into sort of systemic change. That might be a gift. I'm not sure just yet. But I do think we have to at least think about what are the ways that we can transform these kinds of practices into practices that have a kind of longitudinality to them, that where they have a kind of a way to remain with us, where we can do them in long-term form, as opposed to these being ephemeral things that sort of interrupt in moments of more pronounced crisis and then go away when we don't need them anymore, because the need is always there. Another thing that they were sort of stressing in the video is that charity is predicated upon you being the kind of right person to deserve it, right? That you receive charity because you are the right kind of person, you wear the right kinds of clothes, you say the right kinds of things, you practice the right form of religiosity. You're the right kind of person in order to receive charity from whoever is gifting the thing to you. And it is a deeply paternalistic relationship insofar as it's like, I'm going to give you this stuff because I have it, right? What mutual aid calls upon us to do, Dean Spade says, is to act in solidarity with, as opposed to being in a paternalistic, charitable relation to others, right? Acting in solidarity then means you're meeting needs because there is something that is wrong with the system, Dean Spade says, and not with the individual. So instead of targeting the individual and say, this is your moral and ethical failure, that you cannot feed your family, that you do not have a job, it's your fault. What mutual aid says is it is a systemic problem. It's a practice of the system that has produced the occasion for the exploitation, such that your needs cannot be met. And so mutual aid then is also something that comes to then allow us to think more fully and more robustly about systemic practices as opposed to individual failures and failings, because the individual failure and failing is not the actual problem. One of the things that mariame Kaba says is that mutual aid helps in changing the social relations we have amongst each other in order to fight beyond the current moment, beyond the current crisis, beyond the current form of the disaster that we're trying to overcome, right? Mutual aid allows us to make and build relationship. And in the making and the building of relationship, what happens then is the relationships are continually being shaped and shaped by the worlds that are being made when you are actually coming together in these new configurations. It is the fact that you are coming together in ways that in ways that could not have been foretold. You are coming together in ways that could not have been forethought, right? You are coming together in a manner, in the practice of meeting need, right? Out of necessity and love, right? You're coming together in these new configurations, these configurations otherwise, such that you can have interreligious dialogue. You can have dialogue across gender spectrums. You can have dialogues with people who are prison abolitionists and people who are not. If you are trying to attempt to meet need, right? That this actually becomes the occasion for building worlds with one another. One of the interviews that I've probably mentioned before, but I really appreciate, is this interview by a philosopher whose name was Michel Foucault. It was titled Friendship as a Way of Life. One of the things he says in this interview is that friends have to invent from A to Z a way to be with one another that initially is formless. That friendship is this anti-institutional mode of existing with other people. In other words, friendship is this thing that you make between yourself and the other. That it is something that doesn't emerge until you actually enter into the practice. One of the things that mutual aid is, it seems to me, is the practice of friendship, insofar as you don't know what the configuration or the world is going to be that you build together until you actually commit to forming something together with the people that you try to practice mutual aid with. That is where the actual world building happens. And it can be fascinating and lovely and delightful and beautiful and so very joyful if you relax anxiety enough to actually engage in the practice of the attempt to build something together with other folks. And so mutual aid is this deeply, deeply beautiful, rich, dense practice of the capacity for otherwise possibility to interrupt the normative understanding of what our world is and what its capacity for care can be, by actually in this contemporary world practicing care through a kind of love. Another thing I had us watch, which may seem antithetical, or not antithetical, but different than mutual aid, was a video that was posted about Ninth Wonder and his practice of sampling. Posted on NPR. I'll put that link in the comments as well. And one of the things that I really love about sampling in hip hop is that it takes a small moment and it expands upon it. It's kind of like the density of rational numbers rule, which says that between any two rational numbers is the possibility for infinity. So between 1.1 and 1.2 is 1.11 and 1.111 and 1.1111, 1.11111, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? That between any two rational numbers is the possibility for continual ongoing discovery of another number that is there between, such that the concept of between has to actually be rethought, right? I really love that, because that's what DJs do. They find this split-second moment, or they find this 3-second moment, or they find this 5-second moment in a song, and they take that and they expand upon it in order to create a 5-minute song, a 7-minute song that someone can rap over, or that someone can sing over, that someone can rhyme over. That what they're constantly doing is listening for the very smallest, most minute detail in order to take that small thing and expand upon it, which means that even the small, tight spaces have the capacity for augmentation, transformation, or otherwise possibility. And so one of the things that the video said is that sampling is an art form that rearranges space and time using sonic DNA from the past to cook up the future, right? Such that the very concept of past and future have to be rethought too. If all you're actually doing is providing the possibility for further discovery, then all you're actually doing is engaging in this constant form of otherwise possibility as a dialogical practice of friendship, right? I think of DJing, even if you don't know who that person is, Sampling, if you don't know who the person is or you do know who the person is, sampling is about the making apparent the possibility for relationality, right? That's all sampling is I'm going to listen to this song that you might not think has any relation to the thing that I'm about to do, but I'm going to take this small sliver from that song and announce to you the fact that relationality is possible in that thing too. That relationality is this thing that is possible insofar as you breathe, right? Relationality is the thing then that will sustain us. Relationality is necessary for mutual aid projects, as a thing that you have to, with intention and care, enter into. And relationality is important in terms of sampling, because that too is a relation that you have to enter into with intention, right? That you can't just assume that it's going. This is what Ninth Wonder said. You have a shirt, you have some pants, but if you don't know how to put it together, don't do it. You have to understand the relation between in order to make the thing pop, right? This is what DJs are good with doing in their practice of sampling. Ninth Wonder said sometimes people make beats and don't understand body motion. What he's saying in that moment, or what that moment allows me to think about, is how our practices of creativity and otherwise possibility must have to think about the particular, right? They can't just be like these abstract notions that have nothing to do with the sort of material world from which they emerge. If DJ, like he did this sort of dance thing. I don't know how to dance, y'all. Except in church, I know how to raise my hands and say hallelujah and shout, but I don't know how to like dance on the dance floor. It's kind of funny. But one of the things he's saying is that he paid attention to the ways folks danced, the ways people vibe in Los Angeles, the ways people vibe in California when producing the sample that he was able to produce, right? That or when he's producing the song he's able to produce, he's for Kendrick, he's saying that I'm paying attention to the ways bodies move. I'm paying attention to particularity in order to know how can I produce something that will be an occasion for the body to move within the kind of space that they are already kind of moving in and grooving in, right? Our sense of urgency in our current moment, we have to pay attention to local. We have to pay to the local. We have to pay attention to the particular. We have to pay attention to the ways people are moving, the ways people are grooving, in order to charge our imaginations towards justice, right? We have to pay attention in order to see what are the things people care about now? What are the things people are talking about now? What are the things that most urgently concern us now? And can we use those things to vibe with them, to rock with them, in order to create an occasion to say, hey, let's think about universal health care. Hey, let's think about like not having billionaires because they actually aren't that important and they are actually hoarding resources, right? That there's something very, very generative about thinking with Black cultural production as an epistemological project, because Black cultural production announces that there are ways to think that have not been captured by the state. Mutual aid is another practice that has not been captured by the state. It has been produced through the occlusion of the state or being excluded from the state. It's a necessity that has been produced, but again, it's a necessity that has been produced by it's a necessity, but it's also the practice of love. And I think of DJing, or like not DJing, but I think of sampling that the DJ does as not just a practice of necessity of the listening to the song in order to repurpose it, but also the love of music, the love of grooving, the love of moving and wanting others to join in with that. That's what Ninth Wonder is trying to call us to imaginatively inhabit when he's talking about the practice of his own sampling, right? I want to close with two things. Mariame Kaba says that we have to act as if the world that we want is here with us. We can't wait for it to come, right? The only way we're going to have the world that we want is to act as if it is here now, right? We have to allow for the imaginative possibility of other modes of friendship, other modes of kinship, other modes of feeding, other modes of sheltering. We have to allow for that to interrupt our now moment. Because if we only let it ever be about some futureward thing, it will always be something that is futureward, right? That we have to act as if the thing we want is the thing that we have, and then move with that kind of knowledge. What is the thing that we want? Okay, let's do it, right? You can only do it if you start doing it, right? This is what dancing is. Or this is one of the things I've discovered by walking through the woods every day. You can look at a map. Maps are great. They can show you the layout of the land. But maps are abstractions. Maps cannot tell you with specificity what the path is going to feel like, even if it tries to describe it. Even if it talks about elevation and it talks about mileage, right? Or kilometers, whatever the sort of metric that it uses to tell you how far you'll go up and down and around. Only the path is the path, right? The description of the path is a description of the path, and those descriptions are deeply important, but only the path that you walk is the path, right? And so the only time, like the as if is like, well, we have to do it, right? And so the map is like, okay, we have this sort of framework from which we can understand the thing. We've thought about it, we've talked about it, but now we have to act as if we are doing the things we want to do. And when you begin to act as if, you also discover things that you didn't know that you were going to discover. You're going to discover problems that you weren't anticipating, but you're also going to discover joys that you could not have anticipated. Like when I'm doing my walks in the woods, I often am startled that like deer are there, even though deer live there. And so they're supposed to be there. It's me who don't live there. But deer are there, and so I'm surprised and startled by the deer. Or yesterday I saw this huge bird, which kind of scared me because the thing was huge. And it, it landed on a tree and then it took off and it was beautiful, right? I saw a butterfly. It was black and it's beautiful. I saw it yesterday and I saw it today too. I think it was trying to do like a fashion show for me because it let me take its picture yesterday, and I presume it's the same one today because it was in the same spot. Flew and then landed, and it was beautiful. This black butterfly with this orange color and this blue color on it, just beautiful. Like these are the things that the map can tell you you might see. You might see a butterfly, but you don't see the butterfly until you see the butterfly, right? You don't see the turtle until you see I saw turtles today and yesterday. They're beautiful. Once we begin to act as if, we discover delight that we didn't know that we could have, right? And so this is one of the other reasons why we begin to build worlds with one another in uncertainty, right? That you commit to building the world, you commit to friendship, and you can discover that it can be very difficult, it can be very hard, it can be very heartbreaking, but there's also the possibility of love, joy, and delight that you could not have anticipated. And that, for me, the possibility of getting that thing is more important than the recognition that it's also going to be difficult. Everything's difficult. So, as a collective, in concert with other people, in the social world with other people, let's attempt to relinquish anxiety about the possibility for otherwise and begin to act as if we are building it in our current world. Last thing I'll say. Another quote from Mariame Kaba, I think is very important, very small quote. Hope is a discipline. Being hopeful ain't easy. We are confronted with all kinds of terrible news. The world in which we live is a deeply violent world. It's predicated upon the violence of anti-Black racism, settler colonialism, queer antagonism. It's against women, right? It's against indigenous people. That the world that we inhabit, this world called the United States that we inhabit, is a deeply violent world, and it can feel really difficult to hope, right? Because why remain hopeful? Why remain hopeful in a world that continues to harm you? And it seems to me what Mariame Kaba is saying in terms of hope as a discipline is that it's a thing that you practice, right? It's a thing that you have only insofar as you commit to the practice of it. That you don't give up. You still believe. You still try. You still exert effort, right? That it is in the practice, it is in the exertion of effort, it is in the direction of the hope that actually you are producing the otherwise possibility. The practice of the refusal to relinquish hope, and not that Obama version of hope that was that icky campaign bullshit. Sorry, I'm cursing y'all now. Not that version of hope. I mean a kind of hope that is about a realization of the dense interconnectedness of who we are in this world, and using that as the grounds from which to practice relation in a more just and equitable and sustaining practice of living and breathing, right? That's what I think hope is. If we practice hope, we practice otherwise possibility. If we practice hope as discipline, right? The thing that you commit to, the thing that you do in the face of brutal horror and violence and terror, right? It's here. It's with us. It's been with us. To practice hope as discipline means that the state or the forms of governance or anti-Black racism or queer antagonism or anti-womanism, all these things, it hasn't won. That what they want us to do more than anything else is to relinquish our capacity for hope, because hope means that another world is possible. And in the idea that another world is possible, in the imagination for the other world being possible, then the production of that other world in our current world. Hope is important. I feel like I need a Hammond organist at this point. Put me in A flat. Hope is important. Hope is like this very, very important thing that you can't give up on. I've experienced a lot of disappointment in my life. I still hope. Not that I'm the model at all for what y'all should do. Please don't be. I'm not. But what I can say is that I've recognized the joyous disposition that hope has produced in me by refusing to give up on it. In the face of constant disappointment, in the face of harm, in the face of being heartbroken, at the configuration of our world that tells me what I can and can't do. That hope is the pious disposition that has been produced in me by practicing hope as discipline. And it gives me joy, and it brings me pleasure, and it gives me delight. It ain't easy, right? That's what I believe. And so I hope, pun not intended, but I hope that we can hope together. And in our hopefulness, produce a different kind of world with one another. Because our times are urgent. They've been urgent, and they're going to be urgent still. So how can we use the creative resources that we have with us in order to engage in the practice of producing other kinds of worlds in this world? That's what I want to talk about. I hope this is useful. I hope that you have joy in the midst of, the church folks that I grew up with. We would always talk about and sing about having joy in sorrow, right? I didn't know what that thing meant until I got older. That having joy is not the antithesis to sorrow or heartbrokenness or happiness. It's not the antithesis of those things. Joy is the well that remains with you throughout your various dispositions affectively. And so when the saints sang and talked about having joy and sorrow, I know what that is like. To be fully full of sorrow and yet have joy. How can I have joy? Because I hope. I refuse to give up. If there's one thing they gave me that tenacity, that refusal of relinquishing the reserve that is constantly with me. And so I hope you all hope with me, and I hope that we can make worlds otherwise with one another, not just out of the practice of necessity, but out of a deep love for self, for community, and for the earth, and for worlds otherwise than this. Have a great one. Bye.